Hello and welcome to the Middle Market Indicator Update for year-end 2024 from the National Center for the Middle Market. My name is Doug Farron. I'm the Managing Director here at the Center, located at The Ohio State University Fisher College of Business. So we're pleased to walk through the latest data and insights from our semi-annual survey, which some of you may have attended these presentations before. So for about the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to go through a lot of the key data and insights and takeaways from this latest wave as we wrap up 2024 and head into 2025. Our agenda today, I'll tell you a little bit of background about our center, about the report, and about how we collect this information. Share some of the key performance and sentiment data, particularly for the year 2024. And then we'll move into some of the projections for this coming year, finally looking at some of the key issues which continue to be talent, technology, and some of the emerging risks such as climate. And then we'll wrap up, and I would encourage anyone to submit questions via the Q&A button in the webinar link that you all have, and we'll be answering those as we go. So please don't hesitate to send us your questions. But first, I rarely mix outside university business with what we do here at the center, but we did want to acknowledge that recently the Ohio State football team wrapped up a fairly historic run through the first 12-team college football playoff and ended up defeating Notre Dame in the championship game recently, and were crowned the 2024 national champions. So we don't take any credit. Had nothing really to do with the team performance, but certainly kind of basking in that after effect of all the excitement and exuberance that exists around campus and around Central Ohio related to the football team. So just throwing that out there as a starting point, and we'll get into our data here right now. So again, if you're not familiar with the center, we are in our 14th year. We were established in the fall of 2011. Initially as a partnership with GE Capital, but we now work closely with two key collaborators, which are Chubb, the world's largest publicly traded commercial insurance company, and Visa, their commercial solutions group. Much like when we launched, our mission remains to both understand, research, support, and bring more attention to the U.S. middle market. We have come to understand over the years that these companies are fundamental to the U.S. economy. And oftentimes there is very little information or attention paid to them, mainly due to the fact of their private nature. But a lot of them are B2B and reside in the supply chains of larger companies, and just by nature don't tend to draw a lot of attention to themselves, but they have very unique needs as it relates to small and large business. So our charter, again, is to collect data on these companies, do research projects. We do programming. We speak at a lot of events all across the country, again, bringing more attention and sharing insights about the U.S. middle market. And then we also conduct education programs, whether that be for undergraduate students here at Fisher College of Business. And we also have participated and continue to participate in executive education for middle market leaders. Again, not going to go through all these stats, but we define the middle market as companies between $10 million and $1 billion in annual revenue. That's the technical definition. Practically, they're bigger than startups, but smaller than enterprises. The exact number of businesses fluctuates literally day to day and week to week due to growth in, growth out, M&A activity, lots of different circumstances. But at the time of our launch, these roughly 200,000 or so businesses that fell into that definition accounted for almost perfectly the middle third of the U.S. economy in terms of private sector GDP and employment. So we have stuck with this definition, and it's how we collect the data, such as the MMI. And so the middle market indicator, which I'm going to run through today, it is the longest running continual survey of middle market companies in the country. We launched it in April 2012. Today's review represents the 42nd wave, 4-2 waves of collecting this information. It used to be done quarterly. In 2019, we switched to semi-annually. So we conduct these surveys in June for our mid-year check-in, and then December for our year-end check-in. So those are the timelines. Again, we talk to senior financial leaders, decision makers. So when you think of that, it's typically the CEO or founder owner, the CFO, COO, someone in a senior leadership position that can not only report on the results, but plans for the company in terms of how they're viewing different issues. So it's very important that we have that access. And again, we look at companies between 10 million and $1 billion, and then all that data gets weighted back to the US Business Census in terms of industry, revenue size, and geographic location of the companies themselves. So it's a different thousand each time, but because of that weighting mechanism, we know that it accurately represents the sentiment of the middle market. So what is new in our latest data? I'm going to go through some of the key results here. First and foremost, we're seeing very, very strong performance. Now, I sound like a broken record because this has been the case now for almost the last 4 years. In previous presentations, I've noted, coming out of the pandemic when everything kind of ground to a halt, there's been this prolonged recovery that's happened in the middle market. We're not seeing any signs of that slowing down. In fact, some of the numbers that we see here, and particularly how companies are feeling about the year ahead, are evident of very strong confidence and positioning for strong growth moving forward. So the first question we ask is always just more of a qualitative sense of how their companies are doing versus a year ago, so at the end of 2023. And as you can see here, 8 out of 10 companies tell us that their performance improved over 1 year ago. That is about 16 percentage points higher than the historical average. If you go back to the start of this MMI, it's typically hovered around 64, 65%. So 2/3 of the companies saying that their year-over-year performance historical average has improved. And so, again, the trend line that you see here over the last 2 years has definitely been slowly inching up in terms of that performance. But as we know that there are still headwinds out there. Some of them are starting to ease a bit. Some of them are presenting maybe challenges in various ways than over the last year or year and a half. But we see the economic uncertainties that are out there, issues around workforce, talent, skills, and then AI, which we started exploring a year and a half ago, is here. It is here to stay. And now questions around the effective implementation of AI are starting to present challenges to these companies. We'll talk about that here later. So our main dashboard, again, this is again, if I just presented one slide today, it would probably be this one because it really encapsulates the performance of the middle market. But as you can see, revenue growth over 12%, next 12 months projected at around 9%. Those far outpace the S&P 500, which was at 2.2%. Similarly, from an employment growth standpoint, 10.3% average employment growth, 9.5% projected for the year ahead. So again, very strong from a hiring standpoint. And then we use ADP as our proxy for large and small business. It's a headcount-based report that's published every month. And you can see that small business, which is 1 to 49 employees, and large business, I believe, over 750 employees. There'll be industry variations, but those are much lower growth rates, 1% for small, around 4% for large businesses. Capital investment. So we like to monitor where companies are thinking about putting their capital to work. about 2/3 of the companies saying that they would invest additional capital back in their business. I'll show you some of those targets here in a moment. And then most interesting for me is how significantly changed the confidence levels are at the national and local level. Global economic confidence is actually a bit lower than we saw from the mid-year. Certainly we've got a lot of issues going on around the world in terms of the Middle East, Ukraine still lingering on into multi-year conflict there. And then, of course, we had an election this fall, and there's been lots of discussion around how this administration will interact with other countries in terms of trade, tariffs, and so forth. So we don't necessarily dive into those politically related issues. However, just within the domestic economy, as well as local, which is generally a region, a state, a city, these numbers are approaching some historic highs, which again bodes well for this coming year. Always interesting to look at the trend data because it shows patterns over a significant length of time. I mentioned that this is the longest running survey of the middle market. And this chart actually takes us all the way back to the very early days, where for a number of years we saw pretty consistent growth rates. In the high 6%, 7%. We started to creep up a bit as we got, between 2017, let's call it, and 2019. Of course, the bottom falls out in early 2020. And I've actually boxed this area just to highlight how significant this prolonged recovery has been. If I look at, the overall historic averages over 42 waves of measuring this data, the growth rates average around 7.5% for revenue and 5% for employment. In this last 4 years, since the economy's, things started to open back up, businesses, people returning to work, more of a normalization coming out of the first year of the pandemic. Average growth 12.3%, employment growth 10.4%. So there are external factors contributing to that, whether it's been inflation and a tight labor market, but middle market companies continuing to grow at the top line, and they're continuing to add people, and they actually say that they need more people to help sustain this growth. So one of the interesting things that we always track in this survey. Let's go here to, if we double click down on it, again, this is just a little bit narrower view of that trend line, but this is the middle market trend versus the S&P 500 trend. And of course, it has been a consistent story, as I mentioned earlier, with that historic average of about 7.5. We're seeing much higher, between 12 and 12.5% over the last 6 waves of the MMI. It really hasn't moved much. Projected at almost 9% for the coming year, but as we've mapped this out, the actuals always exceed the projections, just because of the conservative nature of these companies. So similar story to what we've shared in past waves, that the middle market continues to be an engine of growth. And they do that because of their long-term view, their resiliency, their ability to kind of pivot maybe a little bit more quickly than enterprise companies, but they also have enough scale versus their small business counterparts to be able to make some significant contributions, as I mentioned earlier. Here we have, this just goes deeper into the rates of growth. And again, same story here as we look at companies that have grown 10% or higher. So essentially, let me start at the top here. In this wave, 85% of companies have told us their revenue has increased during 2024 versus the year prior. Over 50% of those, 55% in fact, have grown 10% or more. So flat to a year ago. Similarly, as we look at the opposite end of the spectrum here with declining companies that who had revenue decreases, that has remained flat as well at 8%. So a very small minority of these businesses actually experience revenue declines, where more of them are saying that they're growing double digits year over year, and we've seen this pattern again in the same time frame as the pandemic recovery. We've seen this acceleration of high growth. And then one other view that we have at our disposal is to look at this by industry. So these are some of the key industries that we track through the MMI. And you can see here that, kind of leading the charge, so to speak, in terms of driving that overall average growth are financial services, retail trade at 13.5%, and then healthcare at just over 13%. Similarly, the projections for this year, financial services, 12.7%, business services, which include law firms, B2B type operations, at 10.6%, are the two that are projected to grow the highest, followed closely by construction at 9.4%. So again, just another way for us to look at this data is by some of the industry drivers. Sometimes we get some questions on other. That's just the kind of lumping together of every other business that doesn't naturally fit by SIC code into some of these bigger categories. So it's just a catch-all that tends to capture anywhere from 15 to 18% of our overall survey respondents. So they're really, the base sizes are just too small to create additional industries. So we just put them in there together. Expansionary activity. So this is another thing that we track, looking at how companies are organically growing that top line. And we're seeing a bit of a rebound after two straight middle markets indicator surveys where we saw decreases in this activity generally. We're now seeing more companies saying that they're going to introduce a new product or service, or they had, I should say, in the last 12 months. They've also done more expansionary activity, 41% of the companies versus 32% in the mid-year and 35% at year end. Also taking on more debt as we've seen interest rates drop with several rate cuts throughout the late summer and fall. Not that borrowing remains cheap by any means, as we saw during most of the decade when the center first started from 2011 to 2019, interest rates were hovering close to zero. So the cost of capital still isn't back at that level, but has become easier to access than the last couple of years. The only activity that has gone down is adding facilities. So a new plant, a new warehouse, a new office, at only 20% of the companies saying that they've done that. We can do kind of a similar walk through employment. So kind of the same story as with revenue. The hiring remains strong, a historical average of 5%. We're doubling that in the last 4 years, with a very strong projection for this year of 9.5%. And then the green, kind of the aqua green line and the blue lines represent those ADP numbers that we grab for comparisons. And you can see a lot of, bounciness kind of in those rates, and a very, pretty consistent straight line for the middle market. So predictable, resilient, hiring, but not without challenges, as we continue to hear things, which I'll show you here in a few minutes, around skills gap, around having, being challenged by finding people with the right technical skills to be able to incorporate new technology, new things that are going to help cut costs as well as increase productivity. And then here is just, again, that click down into employment growth. So 63% of the companies increased their workforce over the course of 2024. And, over 4 in 10 are saying that they're doing that at 10% or higher. So this is, again, the amount of people that they have in their workforce. Very few companies letting people go. Right now, we're seeing 7%, about 30% saying that their workforce has remained relatively unchanged over the past year. So again, the story here is very similar to what we see in the top line growth. And then as we look at it by industry, not surprisingly, the three fastest growing industries based on revenue percentages also lead the way when it comes to employment, with healthcare adding over 12.5%, retail at 11.6%, and then financial services at almost 11%. And those three, with manufacturing, pretty strong projection too at 10.7% for the year ahead. But generally, those industries that did strong hiring in 2024 are also projected to do so in 2025. This is that confidence trend. So I mentioned this earlier and I've got two areas circled here. This is the numbers that we're seeing right now are really the highest that we've seen since what I've got circled on the left there is actually mid-year 2021. So if you think back to that time, this is when vaccines were rolling out, when the economy was opening back up, people were heading back to their work locations. We had a big change from the almost year-long shutdown that started in March of 2020. So that kind of explained that bump in confidence. What we're seeing here is the result of some decrease in the macroeconomic uncertainty, couple of rate cuts, new administration, which by many businesses is viewed as pro-business in terms of things like regulations, things like that. Now, what remains to be seen, we did not ask about implications of tariffs or other policies that may have negative impacts. But again, since many of these companies are domestically focused, we assume that the biggest impact of potential tariffs could be in supply chain costs, as well as just importing raw materials from other countries and passing that cost on to their customers, which is what we saw during the very high inflationary rates of the last couple of years. So story here, though, is local and national confidence very, very high. Again, which is a strong indicator for future prospects. And then this is kind of the second indicator for, again, supporting performance and growth. The investment plans have lagged that performance. So I showed employment growth, revenue growth, both strong for a number of years. The lagging factor has been the willingness to invest back into the business, whereas pre-pandemic, not uncommon to see 70% of the companies investing. It has hovered in anywhere from the mid-50s to 60% over the last 4 years. We're starting to see that tick up. Now we're at 65%, which is the highest rate that we've seen since the end of 2019. So now you've got more companies thinking about capital investments into different areas that'll help support growth, that'll increase productivity, do certain things to help support the business in those ways. So this is another factor that we're pointing to in terms of the confidence and the optimism that exists heading into this year. Those investment dollars, where are they headed? Well, not surprisingly, 25% say information technology is where they're putting it. So we'll get into some of the AI specific data here shortly. But there's varying types of technology. It could be more basic systems or things that have been around for a while, ERP systems, CRMs, digital payment solutions, things that make processes more efficient, more accurate, more repeatable, and less costly, may involve less workforce, are all of interest to these companies. But you can see that training and development is number two. So as these companies have continued to struggle with kind of sourcing and attracting talent, they have turned to creating their own training and development programs internally to address some of those needs. And again, some of these other areas, they tend to jump around from survey to survey, but we are not surprised to see those two at the top. For the rest of the businesses, remember 65% of the companies represent that left-hand pie chart. The other 35% are the savers, but 60% of those savers are saying we're thinking about a future financial investment. Maybe we want to make an acquisition, or we've got something in mind for down the road. We're just not ready to do that yet. Where a lower percentage are saying that they're just going to sit on cash. So that's important to note as well. And then this is looking forward. So in the next 12 months, again, these views, I'm just going to jump back here quickly. The distinction between this, kind of where they would put their dollars. Actually, I'm going to go back a little bit further. This is expansionary activity that's happened in the last 12 months. This is where they were thinking about expanding in the next 12 months. And while some of these may look a little bit decreased from the prior waves, it is still important to note that almost 6 out of 10 companies are planning to introduce a new product or service, and almost the same percentage are looking to expand into domestic markets. So those are two key drivers that, again, help fuel that top line growth that we're seeing and some of the strong numbers that we're projecting. Some of these other things in terms of, again, equity investment, acquisitions, certainly maybe a depressed interest into expanding internationally, but it is something that some companies are saying that they're going to do. Gives us a kind of a glimpse into some of the planning for the year. Challenges. So we kind of bucketed these. Now that we ask respondents, this is an open-ended question. We ask them to list their top 3 challenges, and then we can bucket those into themes. On the left are the kind of the 2 most significant challenges. Those are around the economy and costs. So interest rates still high, inflation starting to come under control for some areas, but just concerns overall about the escalating costs associated with their labor, with raw materials, with the energy used to fuel their plants and other operations, a significant challenge. Workforce and staffing, I've already mentioned this a few times, but turnover rates, finding people, developing people, and retaining those people in order to develop succession plans for a lot of the turnover that we're expected to see, particularly at the leadership ranks and the ownership ranks of middle market companies in the next couple of years, is a big concern. Technology adaptation, I talked about this a little earlier. So yes, AI is here. Yes, many companies are kind of toying with it and looking at it and maybe learning about it, but how is it effectively implemented? And one of the questions we hear all the time is, these tools are great. I don't know where I need to start. I don't know what makes sense for my business. So there are going to be variations across different industries, but that is a concern. And then finally, some of the regulatory pressures that remain to be seen as different policies start to change with the new administration. So yeah, this is kind of just it's kind of a similar way of looking maybe a little bit more in depth at a few of these challenges. I've already talked about some of these. Supply chain disruption, although I'll show you here in a moment, that has improved significantly over the last couple of years. Competition, costs, all these things are issues. So risks, what are the things that are emerging as top risks right now as we just ended 2024? Inflation, cybersecurity, employees, and supply chain, the top 4. Those have remained relatively unchanged over the last couple of surveys, but that's where these companies are thinking. And then as it relates specifically to skills, almost every company, right, the circled data point there, 95% of middle market companies have some degree of challenge with finding the right skilled employees. For almost 40% of them, it is a significant challenge. So again, this hasn't changed a lot over the years. So it's not something that appears to be easily addressed. tight labor market, lots of competition with big companies and small companies. So no silver bullet here, but still top of mind. I just wanted to make that note. And then digital skills certainly remain a significant gap as well. So 46% of the companies tell us they feel that their company has a digital skills gap. 56% say that it's significant or substantial. And again, a little bit of a decrease over time here as we start to see more adoption and pickup of different technology. So companies are slowly starting to build up that skill set, but it still remains for over half the companies. Wages, again, we've been tracking this as a tool to help with some of that talent retention. You can see here the average wage growth has been a little over 5% in the last 12 months, and 75% of companies have said they've been increasing wages, not only to just provide a living wage for their employees, but in order to remain competitive for that key talent. And then I thought this was interesting. We don't always show this one, but I thought it was interesting to see because we've been tracking kind of the work environment for middle market companies. And it's interesting to see that, we read a lot about big companies that have been in the news lately, really kind of doing a forced return to office policy. Again, we are agnostic when it comes to, what's right or what's wrong. Personally, my opinion is that it depends on industry and what works for each company. And the middle market is no different. So almost 60% of the companies now are primarily in person in terms of their employees, but 40% are doing some type of a mixed hybrid approach, giving their employees a little bit more flexibility as needed. Again, big differences here by industry. If you're in manufacturing and healthcare, might be more difficult to provide those options than it would, say, in a technology company or even a B2B services company where we can do more things from different locations. So just interesting. I thought I would share that data point because it's been in the news so much. Climate change. So lots of companies concerned about this. We started asking this question in the mid-year and then followed it up again. Close to half the companies are extremely or very concerned about climate change and what it does to their businesses. No surprise, the biggest concerns are around extreme weather, how it affects supply chain, and then the disruption to infrastructure. I mean, just off the top of my head, with several of the large hurricanes that happened in the fall, and then more recently the wildfires out west, clearly this is an issue that more and more middle market companies are starting to pay attention to when it comes to possible disruption to their business. About a little over 20% say that they were impacted by natural disasters during the last year. Most of the impact were either around operations or maybe something to their brand, reputation, or other harm to their company. And then, of course, financial disruption would be the other area that we are asking them about. But clearly, as these weather events and climate issues happen, there is a risk that it can operate, either the flow of materials through the supply chain or the actual operations of the company themselves. And on a related note, supply chain disruptions, which were a significant issue as recently as the second quarter of 2022, continue to gradually improve. We were at a high of 55% of the companies telling us they had experienced a significant supply chain disruption in the prior 6 months. We're now down to about a quarter of the companies. So I had said this over the last few presentations, no silver bullet here as well, something that can only be improved over time rather than a quick fix. And that appears to be a case as more companies start to diversify their supplier base. We're not hearing as many things about increasing, safety inventory, buying more inventory, things like that. But there are tactics that are certainly being implemented to help address this. So then finally, we get to digitization and AI. Certainly more of these businesses, particularly as you look at the last 2 years versus earlier this decade, more companies are starting to tell us that they are thinking through more of an integrative, collaborative digital roadmap, which allows them to make decisions and investments that are a little bit more cohesive to their strategy rather than reactive to a certain trend or just things that they're hearing from either peers or competitors. So 52% have a technology roadmap. Not surprisingly, the goals remain relatively the same, although we're seeing now more emphasis on productivity and cost savings at over 60% of the companies citing those as their main goals of trying to digitize and upgrade their operations. Time savings, customer experience, some other things on this list. But given all the pressures that we're seeing from a macroeconomic standpoint as well as a workforce standpoint, not surprising that productivity and costs are the two drivers. Of course, there are barriers, and these have remained largely unchanged as well. We know that middle market companies are constrained in terms of resources, both from a financial standpoint, from a people standpoint. And in fact, 40% of the companies say that lack of a budget to be able to buy some of these platforms is the number one deterrent, followed by having the resources to implement it effectively. So that's where trusted advisors and service providers can help bridge that gap and play a role as these companies need that help. The adoption journey, some interesting things to note here. So really as you look at these pie charts, the yellow section of that are companies that are telling us that they're already embedding AI into their business and that they're using it currently. That number has been very slow to change. So there's been a slow adoption across the marketplace. The biggest change has been in the active testing. We're now close to 30% of the companies are telling us they are actively testing out different AI uses within their business, trying to understand what are those repeatable processes where it makes sense to use this technology to help create some efficiencies for them. And then, not surprisingly, a lot of that's happening in the core to upper middle market, where we've got 35% roughly of the $50 to $100 million companies telling us they're testing, and almost 20% of the upper middle market, 100 million and above, saying that they're using AI in their business today. So just a little bit of points there. The definitions remain largely unchanged. And then this was a new question that we asked because it's always interesting for us here at the center, given the lack of some potential, internal expertise and resources, where these companies go for their help as it relates to AI. 46% tell us they look to technology companies. So those could, that's what they're reading, maybe news sources, where they're getting their business information. 45% are just going online, doing some of their own research. And then about 40% rely on service providers or vendors. You can see consultants, even their current employees are bringing some of this information, into the workplace. But it is a large mix right now as they try to sort through, again, what is the best tool for me and where's the best place that I can put it to work in my company. And these are some of the challenges they remain from prior waves, mainly around privacy, security, ethical considerations, how does it impact my workforce, and then eventually whether down the road there's going to be some regulatory and risk management issues that are going to have to be paid more attention as it relates to AI implementation. So with all of that, again, I keep saying it over and over, but we are seeing steady growth in the middle market. The message for 2025 is all indicators point toward positioning for a very strong year ahead, from the confidence to the investment planning to some stabilization and some of the uncertainty that's been affecting these businesses for the last few years. And that expansion is primarily going to happen within the introduction of new products and services, and will happen within the United States. The challenges remain around other macroeconomic uncertainties, whether it could, inflation, still high interest rates, maybe not as much of a concern about a recession anymore, but it always is lingering out there. Workforce challenges and the implementation of things like AI. And then while more businesses are ramping up and actively testing AI, they'll be looking to trusted resources to help with that, while also taking into considerations the risks and concerns that start to bubble up as a result of making those decisions. So again, we are bullish on the middle market. These businesses, are vital to what we're doing here in the U.S. economy. We recently may have seen released some work that we did on the Canadian middle market. So we're looking to do that ahead in the coming year, doing a volume 2 of that work. So we're starting to see the similarities and differences, as well as the interaction between Canadian middle market companies. And just excited here from the center standpoint about the year ahead, continuing to monitor some of these issues, particularly around AI, around climate, and severe weather disruptions, and some of the other issues that we've stayed pretty close to over the years. So visit our website for the full MMI report. We've got a lot of resources out there in terms of the raw data, some industry data, some commentary from us around some of these issues. And then, of course, we'll be adding to our research library over the year as we take on more projects with our partners and additional outside collaborators as well. So with that, we are wrapped up for this presentation. Hope you were able to take some great insights from it. And if we haven't been able to answer your questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible with answers or a direction to get your answers. Appreciate your time and support of the National Center for the Middle Market. I'm Doug Farron, and we'll talk to you again soon.